Welcome to Expat Life Germany, the podcast about life in Germany as seen through the eyes of outsiders. And I am Sean, your host. And I recently decided that I wanted to catch up on some classic German movies, which I haven't seen. And because I have a podcast, that means you, as my listener, also decided you wanted to catch up on some classic German movies. So last week, I watched a movie called Loriot's Pappa, Ante, Portas. I'll tell you why the movie is so important, what it's about, if it's worth watching or not, and how good it is for German language learners. But first, before we get to that, I need to rant a bit. I need to get something off my chest. Now, I have a house that is heated by a masonry oven on the lower floor. If you don't know what one of these are, it's like a fireplace, but with a lot of masonry tiles that warm up and stay warm and radiate heat, and it pretty much heats the entire lower level of our house. Now, usually I buy the wood for it in bulk at the end of autumn, and it lasts me till the beginning of spring, and it's a pretty good price. The reason I do this is because the price is really exorbitant at the hardware store, and buying in bulk from one of the local providers is a much cheaper way of doing it. But this year, I've run out of wood. So I had to go in an emergency, basically, a wood emergency. Let's call it a wood emergency. I had to go down to the hardware store near to where I live and buy a few bags of wood while I wait for the wood to be delivered. So there I was, busy loading wood onto a shopping cart in this hardware store, when an elderly German came up to me and he said, "Entschuldigung." Now, my first thought was that, okay, he wants to ask me if I know where something is located in the store. But he proceeded to ask me if I always buy my wood here. So I was like, okay, maybe he is interested in purchasing wood. So I said, no, I don't. And before I could go any further, he just started going off on me about how it is ridiculous to buy wood here at the hardware store. And that the way he does it, clearly something on my face told him that I wanted to know this. The way he does it is he goes to his forest, he owns a bit of forest, he gets his grandchildren to help him cut down the trees. Then he cuts them up and loads them onto a truck, and that's his wood. And he says it comes to him at a fraction of a price. So he was basically telling me that what I was doing was incorrect. Buying from a hardware store was not the right place to buy from. Despite the fact that I'd even told him I don't usually buy my wood here. He was still driven to tell me that I shouldn't be buying my wood at the hardware store. Now, first of all, this shouldn't have made me so angry because I don't usually buy my wood there. I literally, that was the first time that I've done that I've bought wood from the hardware store. And I know it is expensive, but I was in dire straits. I just needed a few bags of wood to get me through the next few days. But he decided it was his role to tell me that what I was doing was completely incorrect. Now, the thing is, you don't know me. You have no idea about anything about me. Anything. I just had a baby in October. I have 3 kids at home. When do I have time to go into a forest? Even if I had one. Let's say I had a forest. When would I have time to go into the forest, chop the trees down, cut them up into smaller chunks, put them on a trailer, bring them to my house, cut them up some more, chop the wood? I don't have that I'm not even sure if I didn't have kids that I would have that kind of time. I don't have the time. But he doesn't know anything about me. Clearly, he just thinks I'm a pensioner, like him, who owns a bit of forest somewhere here in Franconia. But the problem is I'm too damn polite in these situations. I didn't say anything of the sort. I just I don't even know what I said. I think I just mumbled some kind of, yeah. I don't know. I didn't even know but it irritated me afterwards that I didn't say to him, "Hey man, you don't know me. Just mind your own business." But luckily I have a podcast and then I can rant to you. Whether you want to hear my ranting or not. Now, Nick Houghton is a blogger who runs the brilliant 40% German blog. And he tweeted an article he wrote in 2018, pretty much on the evening where this happened to me. The blog that he tweeted about was called The German Society of Autocorrection. And you should go read this. It's about exactly what I've just spoken about here, about how some Germans have no qualms telling you what you're doing wrong and how you should do it better. In fact, I'll read a piece from this blog post, which is, as I mentioned, the German Society of Autocorrect. One of the lesser-known facts about Germany is that it comes with its own autocorrect function. If someone sees another person doing something incorrectly, there is a 50-50 chance that they will happily interject. Nick, I'm going to say it's more than a 50-50 chance. 50-50 chance that they will happily interject, point out the mistake, and then offer an alternative solution. This sounds, on the face of it, very helpful. However, the correction often comes using abrasive language that, whether intentional or not, tends to make people's blood boil. Yes, Nick, It made my blood boil. And I think it's not intentional. I think Germans just have a way of matter-of-factly stating that what you're doing they think is dumb. They don't mean it in a bad way. They're just stating it factually because to them it is a fact that what you're doing is wrong. And just to continue reading this paragraph till the end, I have heard on more than one occasion that I am doing it wrong or that we don't do it that way, which is the beginning of a correctional reprimand. Worse still, these corrections often come from complete strangers. I mean, this guy in the hardware store went out of his way to come to me to tell me I was doing it wrong. He came across from where he was headed into the store, and he stopped, saw me loading the bags of wood into the cart, and came up to me at least 20 paces. Amazing. Amazing Germans. Anyway, like I said, if you don't know the 40% German blog, go and find it, go and read it. It's got some fantastic articles. And speaking of which, I really should get Nick on the show. Nick, I don't know if you listen to the show or not. Probably not, I'm guessing. But I need you to come on it. I'll be in touch, Nick. All right? Oh, and by the way, if you want to be on the show, not Nick, drop me a line as well. expatlifegermany.de and click on the Be on the Show link. All right, that's enough ranting and soliciting guests for the podcast. On to my discussion of Loriot's Pappa, Ante, Portas, my first classic German movie that I have watched and that I'm going to tell you about. So I've decided that since I've been in Germany for over a decade, it's time that I started to learn something about the German culture. Now, a good way to do that is through movies. One thing I haven't done is watch many German movies because, firstly, my German, up until fairly recently, I'd say, wasn't good enough to get through a movie and understand it all. And secondly, I just wasn't bothered. I think just couldn't have been bothered. It's such an effort to sit down and watch a movie in German and not your native tongue. After a long day at work, you come home, you're tired, you just want to sit on your sofa and you want to relax. And generally, I like to relax in my native tongue, my English. I put something on in English. I don't have the energy to watch something in German. But now, like I said, I've been here long enough. I've decided that it's time to do it. And I'm starting with the classics. So the reason why I'm focusing on classic movies first is think about the movies in your own culture, the absolute classic movies that your country made. They often provide a snapshot of what your country was like at a specific time or specific issues that were going on in your country. And those absolutely classic movies become part of a culture with people referencing scenes or characters from it in everyday conversation. I think Americans can think of quotes like, "I'll make him an offer he can't refuse," or "Nobody puts baby in a corner," or references to horse heads in bed, or even songs from specific scenes. It just becomes such a commonplace part in culture, and you can learn a lot about a culture by looking at its classic movies because of exactly that. Now, German classic films are no different, but they have an added advantage that if you're not a German speaker, you can also learn the language and get some insights into the culture at the same time. So what I decided I would do in the next few months, I guess, is every now and then just watch a classic German movie. So I thought, since I have the podcast, I would also tell you about the movies that I was watching. And I'll tell you what you need to know about the film before you watch it. And I'll give somewhat of a spoiler-free synopsis. And I'll also explain how I believe it reflects something of German culture or how it's impacted German culture. Finally, I will rate how good the film is for learning German based on the language used in the movie. And I'll give an overall rating of how good I think the film is. So the first movie that I'm going to start with is a movie called Pappa, Ante, Portas. And the reason is I have a bit of a history with this movie, even if I hadn't watched it until just last week. After I'd been in Germany for, I think 3 years, some German friends of mine gave me the DVD for my birthday. And at that time, my German was all right. It was okay. I could get through daily conversations, but I still struggled to understand movies. So I just didn't watch it. The movie basically stayed in its wrapper until this year, 2020. Then, when I recently decided that I wanted to start watching some classic German movies, I asked for recommendations from a friend of mine named Dominic. And by the way, if you understand German, Dominic is one of the hosts of a podcast called Ach, and I'll put the link in the show notes. It's a history podcast. I've spoken about it on previous episodes. It's a really, really fun podcast if you understand German. Now, Dominic, when I asked him to which classic movies I should watch, he almost immediately recommended Pappa, Ante, Portas. And I remembered, hey, I actually have that DVD at home, and I've had it at home for probably around a decade. So I decided this would be the movie that I started with. What I've discovered since is that almost every German, especially the ones older than 30, have seen the movie, and many of them will start rattling off quotes from it once you start talking about it. And when I started reading about this movie, I saw that some movie critics rate it as one of the funniest German movies ever made. And I thought, I'll be the judge of that. I'll be the judge of that, Germans. One of the biggest things that I learned from this movie, though, is just who Loriot is. Loriot. I don't know how to pronounce it, actually. Loriot. He was also known as Vico von Bülow. He was a cartoonist and then later had a comedy sketch show on TV in the 70s. I watched a few of these on YouTube, by the way, and if you can understand German, you should too. He had some fantastically hilarious skits back in the 70s. And here's something from the Wikipedia entry on the characteristics of Loriot's work. Loriot's enormous popularity, his accurate language, and highbrow sense of comedy led to the adoption of a large number of phrases and inventions from the series sketches into German common knowledge and everyday speech. Among these are certainly the yodeling diploma, the stone louse, but also sentences like, "With that, you have something of your own," or "Please don't talk right now. There used to be much more tinsel. Look, a piano, a piano, a piano," or the laconic, hardly translatable, "Ach." Oh, I guess that's where Dominic got it for his podcast. Anyway, so that just shows how much Loriot entered the German lexicon and how much a part of the culture his sketches were. Later on in the, I think the late 80s and the early 90s, he made two movies, Ödipussy and the one that I watched, Pappa, Ante, Portas. Now, the thing about being a foreigner in the country is that when beloved celebrities die, everyone is sad around me. And I'm like, I have no idea who that is. And this is definitely the case of Loriot. He died while I was in Germany. It was back in 2011. And at the time, I had no idea of who he was or how much of a legend that he is actually to Germans. So if there's one thing you get from this, even if you never watch the movie, it's that now you know who Loriot was. Think of him as like the Carol Burnett or the John Cleese of Germany, I guess. I don't know if that's too high a praise or if it's a fair comparison, but that's more or less the feel that I'm getting from him. He's a sketch artist first and foremost, known for some cartoons as well, and then these two apparently classic movies. So now, onto this movie. The title, Pappa Ante Portas, is a reference to the sentence the Romans said when Hannibal was invading, Hannibal ante portas, and it means Hannibal is at the gates. So the title of the movie translates as Father at the Gates, and also brings a sense of dread with it. And you'll understand once you hear what the plot of the movie is. The main character is someone named Heinrich Lohse, who's played by Loriot. Loriot, by the way, also plays a few other roles in this movie. Now, Heinrich Lohse is a manager at a pipe manufacturing company, and right from the start of the movie, it's clear that he's quite a difficult man. Now, the catalyst for the whole movie's plot is him purchasing 40 years worth of typing paper for his company just to get a good discount. And what I love about this setup is that it's also extremely German, isn't it? It just makes sense that a German would calculate exactly how much typing paper you would have to purchase in bulk to get the best possible discount. In Heinrich Lohse's case, it was exactly 40 years worth of typing paper. Anyway, this seems to be the straw that breaks the camel's back, and his manager forces Heinrich into an early retirement. And that leads him into a direct conflict with his wife and son, who clearly were happy not having Heinrich around. And Heinrich also decides that he needs to take over the management of the household tasks and chores and basically running the household. And here's the Wikipedia's synopsis about the movie. Starting out with buying a ridiculous amount of mustard to get discount, Heinrich finally invites a film crew to shoot a television series in the Lohse household in order to impress his wife. The more he tries, however, the worse it gets, and Renata seriously questions their marriage. It's a great movie for me because it really put into question a lot of things about relationships, a lot of things about gender roles, and also about retirements. I really was interested by the fact that he was in a pipe manufacturing company, and you see how ridiculous this kind of knowledge is. Later on in the film, when he's walking down a city street and he sees piping in a shop window, it's kind of visible for all to see, and he explains to his wife exactly what the different valves do, and that there's some kind of stop valve that you can't see, but it would probably be here. And it's just such random knowledge, but it's so true, isn't it? When you're working in a certain career, you learn this arbitrary knowledge, sometimes to the nth degree, and it's just completely meaningless when you're not working in that industry. It made a lot of good commentary and points about these kinds of topics and themes. So my thoughts on the movie itself. From the outset, it's very 90s and very low budget. And these two aspects together, it's obvious that it's 90s and low budget. But it doesn't seem to matter. It doesn't affect the film too much, except I would say that German learners trying to learn German sometimes have to deal with badly recorded audio where it's not always clear because of reverb in the rooms or whatever. But on the whole, it's fine. The movie's not about the technical quality. It's more about the dialogue and the characters. Now, some of the scenes in this movie are hilarious, especially some of the slapstick moments. And I think we all know how much Germans love slapstick, right? But there are also other incredible scenes too, like a poet that comes to town to do a reading. And this poet is also played by Loriot. And it is, you have to see it. I can't describe it. It's not going to be humorous at all for me to describe the scene, but there are hilarious scenes. And there's also some scenes that are funny just because of the hilarious dialogue between the characters, like where he asks his cleaner whether she cleans her own house herself or if she gets cleaning help. It's just these little moments or little setups that absolutely killed me. But then there were other scenes in the movie that are not laugh out loud, but that are just genius in their setup. Like the fact that he buys mustard in bulk, because that's all he's used to. He's used to buying he got fired basically, or forced into retirement for buying 40 years of typing paper. He does the same thing when he's running the household. He buys 150 cans of mustard because that's exactly how much he would have to buy to get the best possible discount. So it's just the setup there is very funny, even if it's not a visual gag or a laugh out loud moment in itself. And then there are others, some running jokes through the whole movie, like his son keeps on introducing a different girl at different random parts of the movie. So it all works together. I definitely laughed. I laughed a lot during this movie. But then there are scenes that are just not funny. And this is a problem I've had with a few German comedies that I've watched. Some jokes and gags are very hit and miss in these things, and this movie is definitely no exception. Some scenes were just strange or even dumb, I would say. Some of them were really stupid. But in all fairness, it could be, and this is something I had to keep in mind while I was watching the movie, is that I am watching it as a non-German native. So it could be that I'm missing a subtle reference somewhere or a nuance that I'm missing due to not fully getting the language that was used. So when I say something was not funny, it could also be that I just was completely missing the point or, not understanding it from a cultural perspective. The other thing about this movie is that it's also sometimes very random. And it's again, this is a problem that I've also had with other German comedies that I've happened to see. As an example, there's an absolutely random scene where the main character, Heinrich Lohse, gets arrested. But this scene has nothing to do with the rest of the plot. It isn't funny in any way, and it's not even referred to again in the rest of the movie. So it's just something that happens, I didn't get, and then just disappears and goes away. Also, somewhere around the middle of this film, a friend of his, who we are introduced to only at this point out of nowhere, suggests to him that he should shoot a finale of a well-known TV show in his house to impress his wife. What? What? And why? Why would this impress his wife? He's clearly seeing that what he has been doing in his home has not been impressing his wife. Maybe that's the joke. I don't know. Maybe it's that he did something really, really stupid to impress his wife. I don't know. But it all just seemed like a reason to have an additional comedy scene because it came out of nowhere. It came out of absolutely nowhere and took up maybe 10, 15 minutes of the movie and then was also gone forever. So I don't know. The resolution of the film also was very random because some characters suddenly get introduced right at the end and they influence the entire plot literally within the last 10 minutes of the movie. So I don't know. Maybe it's just that I'm too used to the American or British style of movie making where there's a constant plot arc and things kind of fit together in the end. But in this movie, it felt like a whole bunch of scenes just were randomly strung together and they had an overriding concept, but there wasn't much of a plot, if that makes sense. And afterwards, when I learned that he was actually a sketch artist in the 70s and had a lot of sketch shows, it made sense because that's exactly what this movie feels like. It feels like a whole bunch of sketch scenes strung together to have some kind of main story. So the reason I'm going into so much depth about this is because this is how the few German comedies that I've tried to watch feel. They feel absolutely random, bizarre, and somewhat plotless. And I would love to know your take on this. If you've watched a few German comedies, is this something you found as well? Because it's definitely something that I've noticed. So this brings me to the question, is this a good movie to watch if you're a foreigner and you're wanting to get to know Germany better? Referring to just the movie itself, without thinking of any other aspects, I'd say yes, despite what I've just been saying about it being random and sometimes not very funny, because the characters are great. There are some really, really funny moments and really funny moments. The humor is spot on in some moments in this movie. And from a cultural perspective, I'd also say yes. And this is why. First of all, Loriot is an institution in Germany. Almost everyone knows him, even if they don't like him. And it seems like he has had a very, very deep influence on German comedy. So just from this aspect of getting to know who Loriot was, what kind of work he produced, and also the kind of comedy that he did will help you a lot with understanding, for example, the Germans' love of slapstick comedy. It's very clear to see in this movie. The film also gives great insight into life in Germany and life in the early 90s. So from that perspective as well, it's very interesting to see. From a language perspective, the German that's spoken in this movie is very clear and understandable, even if it's spoken a little fast at times. Now, as I mentioned a bit earlier, there are times when it's a bit difficult to understand what's being said in the dialogue because the audio quality is not always that great. But it's still okay. It's still understandable for most of the movie. The problem is the film is so old that there are some older phrases or terms that I'm not sure are used anymore. The one that stood out for me that I know is not really used anymore is the term Herr Ober. And that's how people used to call a waiter, Herr Ober. But they don't anymore. Since I've been in Germany, I've never heard anyone call a waiter by saying Herr Ober. And I guess this is outdated nowadays. So that's also something to keep in mind, that you're watching a movie from 1991, so some of the phrases and terms might be outdated. If you're new to learning German, this movie, you'll definitely have to have this English subtitles turned on. Now, unfortunately, Netflix in Germany doesn't have this option. It only has German subtitles, so you'd probably need to get hold of the DVD like I had and watch with English subtitles. If you have a moderate German ability, I watched with German subtitles, and yeah, I think it can help a lot. Just to learn some phrases and terms and also to see how they formulate jokes and so on. It's good. It's a very interesting movie to figure out some German phrases and so on. So my overall rating, taking all these things into account, taking the movie plot, the story, the language perspective, the cultural perspective, it's definitely a cool movie to watch. It's a lot of fun. There are other classics that I'm sure are much more drab and dreary to get through. This one is interesting, whether you're enjoying it or not. It's interesting every second of the way. It'll make you laugh for sure in at least a few moments. And yeah, something to be learned in this movie. I guess that's a recommendation from me. If you're wanting to learn a bit more about Germany, German language, German culture, watch Loriot's Pappa, Ante, Portas. And if you can, go onto YouTube and watch some of his skits because they're great. I'll link to some of the favorite that I watched in the last few days in the show notes. All right, those were my thoughts on Loriot's Pappa, Ante, Portas. If you decide to watch the movie, I'd love to hear what your thoughts on it are. Just go to the Facebook group, Expat Life Germany, and let me know. We can discuss it. Let's talk about your opinions. And if there is a movie that you would like me to cover, maybe something that you've heard Germans to refer to, or it's a classic German movie that you've watched that you feel others should watch as well, get in touch with me and let me know. I'd love to hear about it and maybe cover it in a future podcast episode. So in the next few weeks, I will be watching some more classic German movies, and then I will be doing the same thing, explaining a bit more about them and telling you whether I recommend them or not. So I get to watch them, so you don't have to. How about that? Right, remember, you can follow me on Instagram. I'm Expat Life Germany. On Twitter, I'm expatlifete. You can go to expatlifegermany.de, and there are all the past episodes and some other blog articles that I've written. And if you go to Facebook, there's a Facebook group, Expat Life Germany Facebook group. Join it. It will be great to see you there. Music in this episode, theme song by my band, 10 Cent Janes. Other music in the episode, Until the End by Ryan Anderson. Auf Wiederhören.